Unfortunately, Arizona just ended January tied as the 5th driest January on record. I suppose that's better than what we had this past December. That was the driest December on record. Arizona did have 3 fairly dry weather systems in January, so we got a few drops here and there. Phoenix tied with its 12th driest January with 100th of an inch of precipitation. Tucson had its 25th driest January with 1/10 of an inch of precipitation. Flagstaff had its 11th driest January with 19/100ths of an inch of precipitation. Statewide, January tied for its 5th driest January on record. Then looking at the water year 2025 started hot and very dry for Arizona. A water year starts October 1st, runs through September 30th, and that's the way that water is managed in Arizona and the United States. October to March, it's kind of seen as the surplus for our water balance. So we take in winter precipitation. And then April to September is seen as the deficit, where water melts, runs off, evaporates in the spring and summer. Unfortunately, Arizona has just tied for the 11th warmest October to January on record and the 4th driest October to January on record. So it's also important to remember that hotter temperatures make a thirstier atmosphere. So hotter temperatures impact Arizona's drought and wildfire potential. February actually had a fairly active weather system last week, just one. So Flagstaff ended with 1.39 inches of precipitation on the 13th and 14th. Winslow didn't do as well with only 0.08 of an inch. Grand Canyon Airport had 0.83 of an inch. Page had 0.12 of an inch. Phoenix actually got a trace on the 13th and 0.02 of an inch on the 14th. Tucson had 0.15 of an inch on the 14th. Unfortunately, February has been warm and dry and looks like it might end that way. So then the state is currently at 23% of long-term precipitation for the water year with 0.89 of an inch. And that's, over 3 inches below the long-term average. Most weather stations in the state are in their lowest 5 ranking for October to January precipitation. The other water years that had lower amounts than this time, that was 1904, 2000, and 2018. So this is the 4th driest October to January on record for Arizona. Based on what we just talked about, it's easy to see that winter 2025 has been very dry. You're looking at the snow water equivalent and some of the basins in Arizona, the lower Colorado and the upper Colorado basins. Snow water equivalent is also called SWE, and it's how much water can come out of a snowpack. And so then we measure it and we compare it to the median amounts going back to records in the 1980s. Fortunately, the storm last week really helped build the snowpack in the Verde Basin. Let's see, the Little Colorado Basin. The Salt Basin really didn't get much. It's still only in the 11% of median from last week. The Upper Colorado River Basin, so we're looking at Utah, Wyoming, Colorado, that's been doing okay. And their SWE is around 93% of median, so that's a good thing. Something else to consider, the median pack for snow is really affected by that soil moisture. And so when we're looking at that median peak for our snow in Arizona, that usually starts melting around March, the first part of March. And that's kind of what when it becomes important to look at the soil moisture. If last summer, last fall were fairly wet, that's a good thing. That means the soil moisture in the ground will usually be fairly good. But unfortunately, looking at last summer, last fall, everything's been fairly dry. And so our soil moisture being dry means that it's going to probably suck in that snowpack when it melts. We look at what's called efficiency for runoff when we're looking at our snowpack melting, and having that drier soil moisture means that more than likely that snowpack is going to recharge soil moisture first and then not move as quickly into our water supply. And everything the state's been experiencing this last summer plays out in looking at what's going on with Arizona's short-term drought. It's been advancing this winter. Arizona hasn't had this level of extreme short-term drought since July 2021. And the last time Arizona had any exceptional short-term drought was July 2022. So we're really in a very dry portion of that short-term drought. It's really advanced. Then looking at the outlook for the end of February, we're seeing 50–60% chance for Arizona to have above normal temperatures moving into March, and maybe near normal chances for precipitation. That doesn't mean Arizona is going to get some storms, though, unfortunately. Through mid next week, Arizona is still looking dry, so we'll have to see how things look at the end of the month. And then looking at what March looks like, still looking warm, still looking dry. That's not unusual for March to start drying out and getting warmer. So seeing these kinds of outlooks kind of is in line with what we expect, but unfortunately we would like to see some more precipitation before we end up with March. And then looking at kind of La Nina, El Nino, those kinds of areas, the La Nina advisory is occurring right now. What that means is that La Nina has been observed or expected to continue. And so absolutely they expect it to maybe transition into an ENSO neutral March through May. You know, this La Nina that we've experienced, that was a tough one looking at sea surface temperatures, because La Nina didn't really want to trigger over with the required sea surface temperatures. Although the atmosphere really acted very much like a La Nina last December into January. For Arizona, La Nina statistically means storms tend to stay north and winter ends up being drier. I brought this out to take a look at, you know, looking at El Nino, looking at La Nina, those outcomes are statistical. Some La Ninas are wet. You might remember that triple dip La Nina we had winter 2021, winter 2022, winter 2023. So that ended up being La Nina, La Nina, La Nina, but two of those were dry. 2023, we may recall, was very, very wet. Unfortunately, it looks like this La Nina winter is hitting the statistics. It's probably going to stay dry. Popping over into summer, we'll start having a better idea about the monsoon around April or so. Every summer is different. And considering what we just talked about, we're grateful to have Tiffany give us an idea about wildland fire in Arizona. So we're going to let Tiffany come on, and I'll go ahead and end my screen, and we'll go ahead and get started with the next presentation.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you asking me to be here. My name is Tiffany Davila. I'm the Public Affairs Officer for the Arizona Department of Forestry and Fire Management. And what Erin Ann was saying as she was giving her updates for the weather really goes hand in hand as to what we look at when it comes to talking about what our fire season outlook is going to be like. And we say an outlook, there's a potential, you know, things could change over the next couple of weeks, couple of months, depending on what our weather brings us here in Arizona. You know, moving forward, what we're talking about now could change depending on if we do get any moisture, you know, how hot our conditions are going to be, how dry we're going to be here, but we'll get into that now. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to give a brief overview, kind of a wrap up of 2024. Our fire season started early, April, especially in Pinal County. April 1st through May 9th, and those dates were once we started seeing a trend in Pinal County from April 1st until we decided to put out a fuels advisory for that area. And a fuels advisory basically lets residents, the Weather Service has a hand in it, everybody know why we're experiencing the conditions we're experiencing at that time. So when we put out the fuels advisory on May 9th, we were seeing high activity in southwestern Maricopa County. I'm sorry, southwestern Pinal County. So the Maricopa, Thunderbird Farms area. So from 2024, we had 27 fires just between April 1st and May 9th that burned 2,600 acres. If you compare that to the previous year, April 2023 to May 2023, we had 9 fires in that area for 100 acres. So you could see the significance of what we were dealing with in that southwestern portion of Pinal County. Our fire crews were running on at minimum 5 fires a day in Pinal County in that area. So again, like every year, our spring, early summer our fires are predominantly human caused. The weather's nice. People are getting outdoors. They're getting caught up on work that they couldn't do in the winter. So we see a lot of private starts, whether that's welding, grinding, debris fires, people recreating. And then our lightning caused starts are more prevalent from June onward due to the monsoon activity. The largest fire we had in the state and all jurisdictions, the largest fire was the Freeman Fire, northeast of Oracle. It was about 32,000 acres. It went from 1,000 acres to over 20,000 acres in a 24-hour burn period. And that's just due to the fuel loading that was in that area at the time and the dry conditions. And that was a lightning strike fire. The fire season and activity are dictated by our winter and spring moisture. So for this year, what we experienced this past winter and what we're going to see for the upcoming spring of 2025. Our spring temperatures, our fuel loading, our drought conditions, our climate patterns, our soil moisture, how much moisture we've received, whether that's rain or snow. So all of that plays a role into what we're expected to see in the upcoming months when we're talking about our fire activity here in Arizona. Next slide, please. So again, Southwest Pinal County, very active from January 1st, now looking through October, because as most of you are aware, our fire season did push out quite into the fall. We had 85 fires in Pinal County that burned 51,362 acres. So that's a big chunk of acres, a lot of fires for that area in that time frame. Of those 85 fires, 79 were human caused. In April, when we really started to see a lot of activity in that area, we were able to get the county support, the sheriff's office support. People were being ticketed, people were being cited for disobeying the burn ban that was in place in Pinal County. So we really had support of Pinal County at that time because we were really stretching our resources thin too early on in the season. So on top of these fires here in Pinal County, the Tonto National Forest saw high fire activity. They had the Black Fire near Roosevelt Lake, the West and Preacher fires northeast of Payson along the Mogollon. And if you kind of see the correlation between where we were seeing our activity and the Tonto activity, we're talking about the lower lying elevations, the fine fuel bed, the grass, the brush components. That vegetation type really doesn't hold a lot of moisture. It sucks in moisture very quickly when it gets its hands on it, and then it dries out very quickly. So that type of fuel can act like kindling once it dries out very quickly. And that's where we see those large scale grass fires that start very quickly and spread very rapidly. Again, the top causes of our fires, state fires, debris burning, equipment usage, target shooting, and then of course we have a lot of roadside fires that we have to pick up every year. Next slide, please. Just to kind of give you an overview of our statewide fire activity from 2024, we had over 2,100 fires, and that's across the state. That's on state, federal, and tribal jurisdictions. We burned about 282,000 acres for the year, as compared to the previous year, 1,800 fires, 188,000 acres burned. So you can see that we increased the amount of acres burned by about 100,000. What we're seeing over the past couple of years, the lack of precipitation in our winter and spring months is just really creating dry fuel bed across the Sonoran Desert down into southern Arizona. And with that, we're seeing fire in areas that haven't seen fire in quite some time. So there's just a lot of dense vegetation. We're getting fires in those areas, again, that haven't seen fire in a couple years. And that's why we're seeing these larger scale, longer duration fires. Next slide, please. So again, our outlook and our seasonal factors moving into our quote fire season. I say quote fire season because as we've all been aware, we've had fires here in December. We had the Horton fire, we had the Brady fire on the Prescott in January, or a couple weeks ago actually. So we can have fire here in Arizona year round. We just see an increase in our fire activity in May, June, and July, really until the monsoons roll in. So it's happened here before. It's not unusual, but it's not usual. But we do say we have fire season here in Arizona year round. So for 2025, our drought conditions are persistent, as Erin Ann showed the drought slides. I have some of those as well. Our drought conditions are persistent or persist with impacts to fine fuel vegetation. I kind of just explained that a little bit ago. The grass and the brush, it dries out very quickly. That's where we're going to see a lot of our fire activity in those areas. So again, across the Sonoran Desert, down into southern Arizona, on the Mogollon Rim. Again, as Erin Ann explained, above normal temperatures, February for April, nearly statewide. We could see 90s next week. If we start to see that uptick in our temperatures, we could start to see an uptick in our fire activity as well. And then we're likely to see the windy conditions. Early on, we do see a lot of wind in the spring. We get those red flag warnings. Red flag warnings are released by the National Weather Service. We have nothing to do with the red flag warnings, but we do amplify that messaging because under a red flag warning, which are very typical in the springtime, under a red flag warning, we have critical fire weather. Winds are high, relative humidity is low, temperatures are warm. So any ignition source into that fine fuel bed is going to start a fast moving, rapid spreading wildfire. So our increase in windy conditions across the state could induce critical fire burn behavior. Again, we see that above normal fuel along and south of the Mogollon. So areas, again, we could see fire activity, up northeastern Arizona, up into the White Mountains. We also could see impacts to southern Arizona, including far southeast Arizona, and again, across our Sonoran Desert landscapes. Next slide, please. So very similar to what Erin Ann showed, we've got our drought. I just kind of wanted to bring you back to last year, February 6th. You can see we're looking okay. We still have some drought lingering in the southeast corner of the state. And last year at this time, this is where we predicted a bulk of our fire activity was in southeastern Arizona because of those drought conditions. Now, as we compare January of 2025, you see the droughts kind of increasing to extreme drought on the western flank of the state and the western flank of Maricopa County. And then if you're looking now, as of today, you can see that swath of red that's not only on the western side of the state, but now through central and southeastern Arizona. So that's really a concern for us. Again, drought, weather, wind, rain, fuel conditions, soil moisture, all of that plays a role into how we determine our fire season outlook. Next slide, please. With that, here is the significant wildland fire potential outlook. This comes from our predictive services at the region. Our region is Albuquerque in Arizona, so we have the Southwest region. What they're potentially saying is for March, southeastern Arizona. For April, we're moving now into the central portion of the state. You've got some Maricopa County, Pima County, Pinal County in there. And then by May, we should see half of the eastern portion of the state under critical fire and high fire activity. Again, we have to take into consideration this is an outlook. Things could change over the next couple of weeks as we move into our spring temperatures. Are we going to get precipitation? If we do, how much are we going to get? That could really play a role, excuse me, into changing what our fire potential outlook could be. If you notice, I only went to May because we don't have June yet. June is the busiest month for us when it comes to wildfires and wildfire activity. We don't have that yet, so we don't really know what our June is going to be like. But if we're already experiencing high fire activity from Phoenix east, we could have a problem come June, depending on if we get any precipitation or what our weather is going to be like for the next couple of weeks. Next slide, please. So again, an overall up and down weather pattern through May, characterized by warmer and drier than normal conditions. and then a likely breezier, windier pattern across the state. So we could have days where we could have red flag warnings back to back to back. We could have days we could have a red flag warning across the entire state. It's happened before. Typically, we see our red flag warnings in southern Arizona and up in Mojave County, but it's not unusual to see a red flag warning for the entire state of Arizona. And then our monsoon season, Erin Ann kind of touched on this. I bolded it because this is the make or break point for us. We have to really see what our monsoon season is going to do to figure out and determine how much farther our fire activity and our fire season is going to push out. If we have a great monsoon season, it comes early, we get ample precipitation, that's really the driving force that puts an end to our fire activity. If we have a dull monsoon season, we really didn't see anything last year, we had some sporadic rain, it extends our fire activity because we're really not getting that moisture across the board that we need to increase our relative humidity, to cool our temperatures down to some degree, and provide that precipitation that we need to help put out our fires. And what we tend to happen, what we tend to see happen is if we have monsoons with the dry lightning, there's no precipitation to back it up. And that's where we start to see all of our lightning strike fires. So that's when we start to see that trend shift from human caused to lightning starts, is when our monsoon season starts to roll in. So again, it is really too early to tell what our monsoon season is going to be like. Last year, for instance, we heard it was coming on time, it was going to be robust, and we were all excited, and we were going to get a lot of moisture. And it was one of those, okay, well, where's this at? Where it's June, it's July. We really haven't seen a lot of rain. We haven't seen a lot of monsoon activity, and it kind of really just extended our fire season into the fall. Next slide, please. And then I just kind of wanted to touch briefly on our resources. I put this in all of our slides because some people don't realize we do have access to our state, well, we are a state, but our federal and local cooperators as well when it comes to equipment and personnel. The state, us, we sign cooperative agreements with our local fire departments and our local fire districts, and that provides us access to their equipment and their personnel to help us with suppression efforts across the state. So we work with over 200 local fire districts and departments, and we have access to about 2,500 wildland firefighters. Last year, Governor Hobbs signed into effect HB 2751, which is the Great Plains Interstate Fire Compact, and I will come back to that. I'm going to circle that, and I'll come back to that. We also partner with the Department of Corrections. We train and employ 12 DOC fire crews. So they go out, they do our fuels work for us, and they go fight fire for us as well. And then we also have a Type 2 IA initial attack crew. They're a 20-member hand crew that also does the same thing. Next slide, please. We also contract our single engine air tankers and our air attack platform. We do that on our own. And then we partner with our federal agencies, primarily the U.S. Forest Service, for those very large air tankers, those DC-10s, some seats if we need additional, and then the water scoopers. I'm sure most of you saw those performing on those fires in California last month. And then we also have support from DPS as well. They'll provide us bucket work with their helicopters if we request it. Next slide, please. So HB 2751, it's an interstate compact that allows us, the state of Arizona, to bypass the feds and go right to those states directly for resources. There's a lot of talk as to what's going on right now with the federal government, and I don't want to get into any of the politics or start any rumors or add to any of that fire, but what I can say is this will help us this year if something happens with the federal funding. We can go direct. So how our resource ordering works is, if let's say we have a fire and we need a VLAT and we need to order that from the Forest Service, we send that order up to the region. The region is in Albuquerque. They tell us yes or no, depending on is it critical need? Is their homes threatened? Is there, people in jeopardy? And so there's a critical need for that aircraft. They will tell us yes, they'll send the aircraft down, or they will tell us no. With this compact, we bypass that system completely, and we can call up North Dakota and we can say, hey, North Dakota, we need 10 engines and we need overhead. And so this will really help us tap into resources this year because we really don't know what's happening with the federal government right now. So this is our contingency plan for us to get resources into the state to help us fight fire in Arizona this year. And then just like us calling them, they can call us and ask for our resources and our equipment when they need help as well. Unfortunately, all of the Great Plains states in this compact, their fire season, with the exception of New Mexico, their fire season is completely different from ours. So if we need assistance and we call South Dakota or Wyoming or Kansas, they should be able to supply us with their engines, hand crews, or whatever we're asking for when we're in need of additional resources and personnel. Next slide, please. And that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tiffany.